Madam Mayor, thank you for joining us. I have to just ask you, you have a decision to make in terms of vetoing the rebalancing package from the council. Are you going to veto that package?
I'm still looking at that, Matt. Obviously, I'm very concerned with a number of the things the council did in that package. I think their elimination of the navigation team and all the means we have to bring people inside out of homelessness, getting cut was the wrong way to go. I think what they did to Carmen Best and her team was the wrong way to go, and I think may have violated the law. So I want to look at it carefully before I make a final decision.
Let's talk about the navigation team. As you know, the council and its provisos can only just basically make suggestions. So even though they're cutting the funding for the navigation team, or they're making that suggestion, doesn't the police chief have great latitude in what he or she can do with the department, how to run that department? So if SB officers need to be part of a homeless camp removal, they can be?
So I think we're going to have to look at that, Matt, because I think that in some ways the council was a little too cute. They made cuts and they made provisions, and they went in not just to the Seattle Police Department regarding the navigation team. They tried to eliminate a number of jobs in the Human Services Department that make our homeless program possible. So I really believe that, the city council has made its will very clear. It does not want us to move any encampments, regardless of what the public safety issues or the health safety issues. That puts us in a very difficult position. We want to look at what the provisos mean. We have to get an opinion as to what we're required to do versus what is suggested. But the bottom line is, I want to work with council. I want to work to find a collaborative way forward on some really difficult issues. Everyone in Seattle right now is under stress. COVID-19 has been enormously stressful on people and our healthcare system. The economic damage from that has been just devastating for our workers and small businesses and our downtown core. And on top of that, we have a civil rights reckoning that we have to address as a city, state, and nation. This is the time we need to come together, can have some honest disagreements, but to find a path forward. I will continue to try to do that, but I've been disappointed that this council has not been willing to do that on a number of very important issues facing our city.
You bring up a lot of other questions I wanted to ask, but I'm going to go back to the navigation team real quickly. Who will go, given if the cuts stay in place, the proviso is you have to follow it, who would go out and remove encampments?
Well, right now, the true reading of the law is nobody will. And council was very clear and specific in the language that they chose to use, that they wanted to stop the relocation of all encampments regardless of the conditions. Now, some of them had made statements since then trying to back away from that or to equivocate, but it is clear from the provisos that they made that what they want to happen. Now, we're looking at those carefully to see if they give us any latitude, but I think a number of things are absolutely clear from what they passed. Number one, they don't want police involved in the navigation team. Number two, they don't want homeless encampments to be relocated or people taking out of encampments regardless of public health or safety issues. Again, I think that's the wrong way to go. All of us want to bring more people inside safely. All of us are compassionate and want to make sure that we can take care of people, particularly during the time of COVID-19. But we also have to recognize that these encampments have huge, sometimes negative impacts on the people who are living in them and on the communities where they are.
Looking at 2021, are you going to have some sort of budget line item to have a navigation team?
We're still formulating the 21 budget, and I have to continue to look at what the rebalancing package did in its entirety. Council didn't leave an easy roadmap. They inserted a lot of amendments at the last minute. They did a lot of provisos. Some things they appeared to target and cut outright. So that's one reason why we're still looking at the package as a whole to see how to move forward. I never want to be, and I'll make it clear, Matt, because I think some people feel like there's this broken cycle in City Hall. I don't want to be in a position where I veto. I'd rather work at the front end to see if we can find solutions together. I'm starting to work with council now on some issues that I hope that's the roadmap. But at the same time, I have an obligation to do what I think is right for the city.
Well, are we at an impasse here, much like what the federal government's talking about? Maybe I shouldn't have bring that up, but is there a chasm right now between you and the council members? Now, while different branches of government it's designed to debate and have disagreement, there seems to be a bigger chasm growing. Do you feel that?
I think that we work together on a number of issues on a regular basis. And sometimes that gets lost, you know, whether it's the Transportation Benefit District that's going to be on the ballot, whether it was Seattle Promise. Every day there's a number of bills that go through City Council where we're in complete agreement. But there is some areas, some policy differences right now that are very stark. But for me, what is starkest is council, it is one thing to disagree, but you need to have a plan. You can't just say, I disagree with you. You have to have a different route forward. And that's what we haven't seen from council. On policing, all they wanted to do was cut without giving us a plan for what that meant. On homelessness, they just want to cut the navigation team. But what does that say to all the communities right now in Seattle that have really difficult encampments and public safety issues, both for the people living in them and for the communities they touch? So it is not enough just to cut or to put out a slogan. You actually have to implement this. And that's what I'm hoping the kind of conversation we can have.
While some support the daily marches happening in Seattle, there are many that are clearly fed up with the interruptions they're causing on city streets and neighborhoods. They're especially fed up with the violence and vandalism that has happened after some of those. Even your own home, you had some vandalism following a march. What do you say to the people in Seattle who see Seattle devolving into a lawless city where police are being hamstrung by policies that let vandalism take place unfettered?
So first, I don't believe there are any policies that let vandalism go unfettered. The police have a really hard job right now. There's no question about it. But Chief Best has made very clear, and I agree and made clear, is that we are not asking them to stand down in any way. But they're dealing with a difficult reality. We have to make clear, you know, the First Amendment rights are cherished, and the right to protest is not just important to America and Seattle. It actually makes us better. But there's a difference between peaceful protests and raising your voice and committing violent acts or acts of vandalism. And we have seen in the extreme in Portland, night after night, what the acts of vandalism look like. And we've seen that here in Seattle, where there has been gatherings, and I won't call them protests, I will call them gatherings and direct actions whose sole purpose was to cause some destruction, vandalism.
But there doesn't seem to be a policy or a method to prevent that from happening. It seems to happen over and over again.
Well, it is very difficult. If you have a very large group of people, you can't have a large enough police force to keep every single one of them from doing some of the damage they're doing. Seattle Police Department has made a number of arrests in each of these protests that have turned violent. They are continuing to investigate each of the scenes that we've seen play out, whether it was the looting downtown, whether it was the fire started at the youth detention center. So there are investigations ongoing. But it is, you know, I think you've seen the pictures of the police officers who were injured by the explosives or commercial grade fireworks, whatever you want to call them. That is real danger and real violence. And we have got to get to a place where every elected official can distinguish between peaceful protest and people raising their voice in righteous causes, which we are doing right now in America, and those who are just trying to cause criminal activity.
Regarding Chief Best's departure, you said that she came to you 2 weekends ago and wanted to retire. Now you have a prominent woman of color as a chief who calls it quits 2 years into her term, and it's during a time when racial equity, as you talked about, is happening. The call for it at police departments happening all across the country. It becomes a head scratcher then for a lot of us who see that situation we had in Seattle and her departure. Was there pressure in City Hall or your administration that she needed to step down? And is that
absolutely not? I still would like Chief Best to be our police chief, but I completely understand her decision to do that. And it was clear, and she made it clear, that the City Council's decisions over and over again to make statements about and make decisions about the police department without ever consulting with her showed a significant lack of respect. And then the day after she appeared at a press conference with me to criticize their approach, the very next day, they introduced a new amendment that had never been aired before and voted to cut her salary almost in half and cut her whole team's salary. She was, this was a balancing package for all of government. She was the only department director whose salary was cut. Only her team was targeted. I think it was very unfortunate because I still believe Carmen Best was the police chief that could get us through this the best. I have confidence in Adrian Diaz, but Carmen Best, both because she has the lived experience of knowing every part of that department and because she is committed to reforming it and making sure it's better, but also because she has walked through life as an African-American woman. She has that lived experience too. And I saw it showing up every time we spoke. She's so thoughtful. She's a national leader. And the fact that at this moment in time she was driven out, I think just shows us that things broke. And I hope that it was enough of a wake-up call that we can now work together to get to a better place.
The Downtown Seattle Association estimates that 70% of downtown's 343,000 workers could work virtually from home. Amazon put out that poll to its employees, where would you like to work outside of Seattle? DSA estimates 10,000 jobs. If they were to relocate outside the city limits, Seattle would lose $37 million in annual worker spending for all the little small businesses there. Do you believe those numbers? And what do you see when you drive downtown now with all those boarded up stores?
So Matt, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I will say this. It's one thing that I think maybe we should do as a government together and all of the city council to walk through downtown and to walk through Sodo and Lake City and the different parts of the town. So many people are at home and working from home. They don't see the enormous change. And I think downtown, for me, in many ways, it's heartbroken. When those large employers left, we saw almost immediately that the small businesses lost their customers and had to shutter their doors. We know that we are in this COVID state at least through the end of this year and probably well into next year. So people.
But then you have the startup Seattle tax that could drive some of the bigger businesses that feed the smaller ones out of town.
Absolutely. And if you look at my letter where I did not sign Jumpstart, it's one of the factors that I said. We're going to have to fight to get every one of those jobs back downtown. Companies right now today, not just Amazon, but every company is assessing whether they want to return to brick and mortar. Employees like working from home. You will see more and more people working from home permanently. Large companies like Facebook and Apple have announced that they will be having people work from home at least through July of next year. If we want downtown to come back and be vital, we're not going to be able to rely just on tourism. We need those jobs and we need the people living downtown. And they're going to have a choice. And if their choice is we can move them from their living room to downtown Seattle and pay a fee, or move them to Bellevue and not pay a fee, I think we'll be at a disadvantage. That's why I want to work with council to do a different approach, because I am concerned that we not only won't have the jobs returned, so we won't get the new taxes, we won't get the old taxes or the business in our small businesses.
Will there be furloughs or layoffs in 2021 for city workers?
We are finalizing our budget, but we're facing over a $300 million gap. And given the tough choices we have to make, we think it's very likely that there could be furloughs and or layoffs. We're working closely with our employees and the represented unions. But again, it's one of the reasons why I was very concerned about the city council spending down most of our emergency funds and rainy day funds. We need those monies, both if another emergency happens, because that has been 2020, and because we need it to bridge those budget gaps. So I'm very concerned about next year that if we don't have those kinds of resources, that we will have significant layoffs and furloughs. And for Seattle residents and businesses, that means fewer government services, the things you need to rely on. So I am concerned about that.
Why did you decide to fight the effort to get a petition to recall you?
I filed it because I believe that the recall itself is not proper under law. I will tell you, Matt, that I have not spent that much time focused on that because we have a pandemic, an economic crisis, and a civil rights uprising.
But it's appealing to the state Supreme Court, though.
Correct. But I think that the position in the paper, and I think it is actually the law, is you ask political leaders to make difficult decisions all of the time. And the law is clear that you cannot recall someone for making a decision that you just politically disagree with, which is what I believe this recall did. And the proponents of it have been very clear that they just don't want me to be mayor and they disagree with me politically, which is fine. That's why we have elections. But my job as mayor is to continue to try to focus on the work for all the businesses and residents in Seattle, regardless of the distractions.
Is there something that you've seen lately that's been misinterpreted by the media or the public over the last week regarding Chief Best? I know you've kind of addressed that already, but the council, something that I haven't asked you about that you think that the people should know about?
So I think that we have been in such a difficult time. In many ways, what government is doing has not been as much a focus of people. I think we're at a real point of inflection on what we want our city to be. And I think it is time to be thoughtful and not time to be just act serendipitously or without thought. And I think council, time and time again, if you look at recently what they've done, because of their decisions, Chief Best, one of the best police chiefs in our country, stepped aside at a time when we really need her. They passed bills that we warned them that we would have a greater deficit. They did it anyways, and then they had to backtrack. So I think rather than pass laws and then backtrack, let's sit down and try to work these things out, because we are in COVID for a while. And when we come out of COVID, every city, not just in this country, but in the world, is going to be emerging almost at the same time. And every city is going to be fighting to get their economy back, fighting to get their society back. We want to be as well positioned as we can be so that we have resilience, so that we do give our workers and small businesses enough support that they can make it through this difficult time, to continue to have the great civic infrastructure. But it's not going to happen by happenstance. Seattle is going to have to stand up and say, what do we want to be? And will we fight for it? I believe we can come back better, stronger, more equitable, but it will not happen by chance. It will only happen if we make the decisions to come back that way.
Just one last follow, just because of what you said. Is there not discussions between your office and city council staff? When you say that we want to sit down and together, for people who don't understand the politics of it, why isn't that happening? Why isn't that happening? Or is it happening and there's just disagreement?
So I meet with council regularly as individuals. Most council members meet with me at least once or twice a month. And our staffs talk regularly. On a few topics, we've disagreed on our approaches, but I think they also, particularly in the area of police funding, there was so much pressure from the defund by 50% that a majority of council felt the need to make that commitment without thinking it through or having a plan. And we saw last week, even though 7 of them promised they were going to cut by 50%, they didn't. In fact, most of the cuts that they passed were ones that Chief Best and I were able to put forward after some thought. And the additional ones were like cutting her salary. So governing is complex. You can't just, we have to respond to and listen to the voices. I want to make that clear. I think community right now has to be centered, and we have to center the voices and do better for them. But we also have an obligation that if we're going to make drastic changes, we have a plan on how we're going to implement that. If someone calls 911 and they don't need a police officer and we need to send someone else, who is that? How do we get them? How do we train them? How do we make sure they're available 24/7? What will it cost? Where will they be? These are really complex questions that no city in the history of humankind has ever had a functioning society without some kind of police. So what we're doing is new to reimagining policing. We have the need for police, but we also need to have different kinds of responses. But it doesn't happen by itself. You have to identify with community. What are those things we need? How do we get the people trained? How do we scale to the size of the problem? How do we make sure that when someone calls 911, they can respond anywhere in the city 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? So I think that we all agree we need to reimagine how we do policing and how we provide community support and safety, but we need to be super thoughtful about it.